Sometimes, it doesn't feel like money is the problem. It feels like the problem is everything around money. The quiet pressure when a bill notification pops up and you haven't even opened your banking app in days. The small wave of guilt when you say yes to something you know you can't really afford, but you don't want to be the difficult one. The low-level tension that follows you through the week, not sharp enough to panic, but heavy enough that you always feel a little behind. And maybe the hardest part is this strange feeling that you're doing all the right things. You work, you pay your bills, you try not to be reckless, and still, nothing really changes. It's like you're running, but the scenery stays the same. My name is Mike, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, wealth, and why smart people stay broke longer than they should. If you're someone who works hard but still feels like one unexpected bill could knock you off balance, make sure to hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. I want to talk about something that sounds small, almost boring at first. Not a strategy, not a hack, not a dramatic lifestyle overhaul. I want to talk about boundaries. Small financial boundaries. The kind that don't look impressive on paper. The kind nobody praises you for. The kind that feel uncomfortable in the moment, but quietly compound into something that changes how your life feels. Because for most people, the reason money never seems to move forward isn't income. It isn't intelligence. It isn't even discipline in the way we usually think about it. It's the absence of boundaries. Most of us were taught to think about money in extremes. Either you're bad with money, or you're good with money. Either you need to make more, or you need to budget harder. Either you're irresponsible, or you just haven't found the right system yet. And when those extremes don't work, we quietly blame ourselves. We assume the problem is that we're not trying hard enough, not motivated enough, not disciplined enough. But that framing misses something subtle and important. Most people don't fail with money because of one big decision. They fail because of 1,000 small decisions where there was no boundary at all. No boundary around what you'll say yes to. No boundary around what you'll tolerate. No boundary around how much of your future you're willing to trade for comfort right now. When people think about boundaries, they usually imagine something rigid, a strict budget, a harsh rule, a complete lifestyle change. But that's not how boundaries actually work in real life. Real boundaries are quiet. They don't feel powerful in the moment. They feel awkward. They feel inconvenient. They feel like you're being a little annoying to yourself, and sometimes to other people. And because they don't create immediate relief, they're easy to abandon. Let's say you decide you're not going to order food every time you're tired. Not because delivery is evil. Not because you're punishing yourself. Just because you want to notice when you're spending to avoid thinking. The first night you say no to yourself, nothing magical happens. You don't suddenly feel rich. You don't feel disciplined. You mostly just feel slightly uncomfortable and mildly annoyed. You still have to eat. You still have to deal with being tired. And now you've added one more small friction to your evening. So, it doesn't feel like progress. This is where most people stop, because our brains are wired to notice relief, not trajectory. We're good at recognizing when something makes today easier. We're terrible at recognizing when something makes next year easier. Boundaries don't make today easier. They make tomorrow quieter. And that's a kind of payoff we're not emotionally trained to value. There's also something else happening under the surface. When you don't have small boundaries, you end up living in a constant state of negotiation with yourself. You're always deciding in the moment, always debating, always justifying. You tell yourself this expense is okay because the last few were small. Then the next one is okay because you've been stressed. Then the next one is okay because you'll be more careful next month. None of these decisions are irrational on their own. They all make sense emotionally. But what they create is a pattern where the future keeps losing. And the thing about patterns is that they don't feel like choices anymore. They start to feel like personality. You begin to think of yourself as someone who just isn't great with money. Someone who always means well but never quite gets ahead. Someone who tries, but somehow the numbers never line up. That story about yourself becomes heavy. And once that story is heavy, it starts shaping your decisions before you even make them. You hesitate to plan because planning hasn't paid off before. You avoid looking too closely because it always feels disappointing. You stop expecting progress, which makes it harder to create progress. This is one of the quiet ways people get stuck financially. Not because they're reckless, but because they're exhausted by constant micro-decisions with no clear boundaries. Small financial boundaries do something different. They remove decisions from your daily emotional state. Instead of asking, "Do I feel like I can afford this today?" you slowly move toward asking, "Does this fit inside the way I've decided to live?" That sounds subtle, but psychologically, it's a huge shift. When your spending depends on how you feel that day, money becomes emotional. When your spending depends on boundaries you chose calmly, money becomes quieter. Let me give you an example that most people recognize. Think about the way work stress and money stress interact. You have a hard week, long days, a manager who doesn't listen, deadlines that feel pointless. By the time the week ends, you're not thinking about your financial future. You're thinking about relief. So you spend a little more. Not dramatically, just enough to feel like you're taking care of yourself. And that makes sense. You're tired. You want something to feel easier. But here's what happens when there's no boundary. That relief becomes part of the system. Work feels draining. Spending feels comforting. Money slowly becomes the tool you use to emotionally survive your week. Over time, the cost isn't just financial. It's psychological, because now your sense of relief is tied to spending. Your sense of reward is tied to spending. Your sense of rest is tied to spending. You've unintentionally built a loop where money is regulating your emotions. A small boundary interrupts that loop, not in a dramatic way, not by saying you can never spend for comfort, but by creating a gentle line that says, "This is where I pause before I cope with money." That pause is uncomfortable at first. It forces you to feel the tiredness instead of buying your way out of it. It forces you to notice what you're actually needing in that moment. Sometimes you still spend, but now it's a choice you're aware of, not a reflex. That awareness compounds, not because it saves you a huge amount immediately, but because it changes how often money is used to solve emotional problems it can't actually solve. This is where the idea of compounding becomes more psychological than financial. We usually think of compounding as a math concept, money growing on money over time, but behavior compounds too. If you practice one small boundary once, nothing changes. If you practice it occasionally, things feel inconsistent. If you practice it often enough, your nervous system starts to expect a different outcome from money. You start to associate money with stability instead of relief. You start to associate spending with intention instead of emotion. You start to trust yourself a little more. And trust is a big deal. Most people don't struggle with money because they don't know what to do. They struggle because they don't trust themselves to follow through over time. Every broken promise to yourself, even small ones, chips away at that trust. I'll start next month. I'll be better after this busy period. I'll fix it when things calm down. Those aren't lies. They're hopes. But when they repeat without boundaries to support them, they slowly teach your brain that your intentions aren't reliable. Small boundaries rebuild that trust quietly. When you say, "I don't spend on this category during the week," and you keep it once, your brain notices. When you say, "I check my balance every Sunday," and you do it even when it's uncomfortable, your brain notices. When you say, "I pause 24 hours before big purchases," and you follow through sometimes, your brain notices. Nothing dramatic happens externally, but internally, something changes. You start to see yourself as someone who can hold a line. Not perfectly, not rigidly, but consistently enough to feel grounded. This is where the turning point usually happens. Not when your income changes. Not when your net worth crosses a certain number. It happens when money stops feeling like something that happens to you and starts feeling like something you have a relationship with. A relationship where you're allowed to say no. A relationship where you're allowed to pause. A relationship where you're allowed to choose stability over short-term comfort without feeling deprived. When that relationship shifts, decisions feel different. You're less reactive. You're less ashamed of looking at your numbers. You're less likely to avoid thinking about the future because the future no longer feels like a vague threat. It feels like something you're slowly shaping. This doesn't mean life gets easy. Bills still exist. Unexpected expenses still happen. Stress still shows up. But your internal experience changes. Instead of feeling like money is constantly slipping through your fingers, you feel like you have edges, limits, a shape to your financial life. And having shape is calming. It reduces the background noise in your mind. It creates fewer moments of regret. It gives you small moments of quiet pride that no one else sees. So how does this look in real life? It doesn't look like cutting everything you enjoy. It doesn't look like becoming rigid or joyless. It looks like choosing a few small lines you're willing to hold consistently. You might decide that some parts of your life get structure because they create peace. You might decide that some spending categories are allowed to be flexible because they support your mental health. You might decide that certain financial conversations with yourself happen on a schedule, not only when things feel urgent. The key is that these boundaries are chosen when you're calm, not when you're stressed. They're not punishments. They're support structures. They exist to reduce how often you have to negotiate with yourself when you're tired, overwhelmed, or emotionally depleted. And you don't need many of them. A few well-chosen boundaries, held gently but consistently, change the entire tone of your financial life. Not overnight, not dramatically, but slowly, in the way that actually lasts. You start to notice that you're less anxious opening your bank app. You start to notice that unexpected expenses don't throw you off as much emotionally. You start to notice that you're thinking a little further ahead without forcing yourself to. Progress stops feeling like pressure. It starts feeling like direction. And direction is something your nervous system can relax into. If you're listening to this and thinking, I've tried rules before and I always break them, I want to say something gently. Breaking rigid rules doesn't mean you're bad with money. It usually means the rules were designed without your psychology in mind. Small boundaries work because they respect how humans actually function. We're emotional, we get tired, we live in environments that constantly invite us to spend for comfort. A boundary that ignores that reality will always feel heavy. A boundary that works with that reality feels supportive. You don't need to become a different person to build financial stability. You don't need to be perfectly disciplined. You don't need to optimize your life. You just need a few small edges that protect your future from your worst days. That's what boundaries do. They don't make you perfect. They make your worst days less expensive. And over time, that compounds into something quietly powerful. More calm, more clarity, more space to make decisions from a grounded place instead of a reactive one. If you take anything from this, let it be this. Progress with money doesn't come from dramatic changes. It comes from small boundaries that you're willing to hold even when no one is watching, even when it doesn't feel rewarding yet. Those boundaries don't just protect your bank account, they protect your attention, your emotional energy, your ability to think about the future without feeling overwhelmed. And you don't have to get it perfect. You just have to keep choosing the quieter option a little more often than you used to. That's enough to change the direction of things over time. Not all at once, but steadily. If this video made you see your money differently, hit that like button. It tells the algorithm this stuff actually matters. Subscribe if you want more honest conversations about money, behavior, and building a future that doesn't feel fragile.